book 14 of 2020 was Noughts and Crosses by Malorie Blackman. So, interestingly, I had never heard of this book before, and quite a few people have said to me that it's kind of like really famous and they read it when they were younger. And I wonder if maybe it came out when I was a bit like older, so I missed it. It was like Harry Potter was coming out when I was in school. So I think that this maybe was published when I was too old to know about it, because it's like a YA kind of like book. I liked the book overall. I thought that it was quite an insightful speculative fiction about what would have happened if England had been colonised by Africa, and how that would have changed like how we live our lives in modern day time, and how that kind of impacts on the globe. If there'd been white slaves, and therefore we now would be kind of, instead of having white privilege, we would have black privilege, or as Malorie Blackman kind of might say, a cross privilege. And it's interesting that she picks up on a lot of things that demonstrate white privilege that white people might not realise. And I thought that was really, really good of her, because sometimes it's difficult for a white person to understand what white privilege is and to understand what systemic racism is, unless they've read a lot or they've kind of had experience of it with someone that they know, or they've watched documentaries or whatever. It's quite difficult growing up to recognise that unless you're educated, because you don't experience it. It's kind of at a distance to you usually. For example, she mentions kind of like plasters, and how plasters are always in like a nude colour, which is like white people's skin, like it's, why aren't there black plasters? Why aren't there? Something as small as that, like why is that the case? That's white privilege right there. And she talks about things like Crossmas, because obviously Christmas is kind of like, in England everyone celebrates Christmas, but it's only Christians that should be celebrating Christmas. But yeah, it's kind of been appropriated. I thought it was really interesting that she used capital letters for crosses but not capitalisation for no's. I thought it was quite interesting that she selected that, to show this kind of difference between them. And she incorporates as well a lot of kind of ways of speaking that are more inherently black than white. So she kind of, like, one example would be like nothing doing. I had to Google that because I had no idea what that was, but it's a phrase that if you were black, that would be an obvious thing. And things like meanings of names. And I recognise this one because I've read The Hate You Give, and it was mentioned in there as well that it's a black culture to like give people names that kind of mean things, whereas white people just name people things. Like, they don't really kind of, obviously some people give meaning to names, but like, I'm sure, well, my name means something, but I don't go by that meaning, and I wasn't called that because of the meaning, if that makes sense. And then obviously she refers to like blankers and daggers instead of other terminology that might be used for black and white people. So I thought that was really interesting that she did all those things, because it wasn't like she was just taking what's already in society to kind of go like, look at this. She glossed over it, and kind of, it's still the same, but it's done in a way that's easier to accept. I think it's easier to kind of see it because it's not too close. And for that reason, I thought that it was a good book. But having said that, I had a real issue with the way that Malorie Blackman writes. And I don't know if it's intentional or not, or if she's trying to kind of write in a culturally different way. I don't know, but it's terribly written. You've got kind of like 2-word sentences. Like, you can't have a sentence with 2 words. Like, it's grammatically incorrect. I think isn't the only sentence with 2 words is Jesus wept, or something like that. Like, it doesn't make sense to have a sentence with 2 words. And she's like writing quite colloquially quite a lot of the time, and I understand that that's probably to make it more accessible to kind of like YA literature. but the grammar was just really bad because that's the way that it was written. So it was kind of like really hard to read, and it was disrupting the flow quite a lot because it wasn't flowing because it wasn't in proper English. I mean, and whether she's trying to hint at the fact that what is proper English, but I mean, I don't know. And then she had a lot of like comma splices, and she had conjunctions at the beginning of sentences. And I get that a lot of books write like that, like I understand that, but I just thought it disrupted the flow a lot, and I've never been that affected by bad writing like that before. So I had issues with that, and particularly as well since this is for, you know, a book that a lot of children will be reading, or a lot of young adults that be reading. There's no wonder that they can't write very well if they're reading books like this. You know, go back to like Roald Dahl any day. And then I don't know what it is about YA, and I've been reading a lot of YA, and it's in all the YA books. There's always some kind of love affair between a girl and a guy who are teenagers, and it's absolutely farcical and ridiculous, and they fall in love with each other. And I get, okay, that when people are younger that they think they're in love with each other and whatever, but I'm just like, I'm reading it going, this is not realistic. Surely this is not realistic. Like, I mean, when I was younger, I was never in love with anybody when I was like 14, so maybe that's why I don't understand it. But I just kind of reading it going, does this really happen like this? Like, is this how 14-year-olds think? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't even know if she's supposed to be 14. I can't even remember. But yeah, it was just like that kind of Twilight kind of, you know, teenage fantasy kind of, you know, where the guy always does, you know, what you want him to do, and the girl always does what you want her to do. It's kind of like, for God's sake, as an adult reader, it's really tiresome to read things like that. And it's funny actually because I've read Sally Rooney's Normal People, and that was more realistic. It was still annoying, but it was more realistic than what this was. So it's quite tiresome. And also, Sephy as a character is really kind of self-absorbed. She's really naive and she's really petulant. And I get that again is another trope that writers use. You know, Harry Potter is really annoying, really petulant, you know, really self-absorbed. It's kind of a normal kind of thing to put in books. But I just kind of thought, is this Malorie Blackman trying to kind of like show what white people are usually like? And I was kind of like, oh, I don't like that. That's kind of, I get the systemic racism stuff that you're putting in, but that's a bit too far to make that character be like that, and to make the kind of the white character who's a representation of black people, the one that's the sensible one. It was just a little bit like, and then as well, the other thing is that Sephy's like an alcoholic for a little bit, and I'm just like, again, is that like a hint at white culture? Because like, white people like a drink of Chardonnay. I don't really know. Like, I was just a little bit like, almost tiny bit offended there. And the thing as well was that I watched the TV series on BBC, and it was really good, really amazing, and actually took what the story is, which, you know, it's a great story, and made it better. And they kind of made little changes that made it significantly improve. There was more suspense in it. There was more kind of like, oh, I want to watch the next episode and whatever, which you didn't really have in the book. And the characters were a lot better in the TV series than what they were in the book. So I would probably say, well done, Malorie Blackman, for kind of coming up with this story and for writing it and for, you know, creating these characters. You know, they're amazing, but the TV series did it better. So I would, you know, preference that over the book.